Gain staging is very important, and the most important fact I can think of is, first of all, we don't want our channels, our entire project, once mixed together, going into the master track, we don't want them to clip. So we want everything settled fine in such a way that once I play this entire track, even on its maximum peak levels where I have everything playing, like the most elements playing together like this, now right here you can see that my master track reaches -8 dBs, so that's far away from clipping. That's the first fact. So I don't want my master track clipping whatever I do, since I might be applying some processing right there, so I don't want to have to deal with that gain staging beforehand. So adding, let's say, a utility so that I can process after that with effects or processors that actually expect a quieter signal. That's the first thing. And the second, I think even more important with gain staging, is inside the actual tracks and group channels. And that's, let's say I have this OTT compressor and EQ right here on this bass track, and I group them together in a rack so that I could bypass them easier with just a click of one button. Now I want that change applied right there to just give me the change I made, not any volume change, not as much volume change as the actual processing itself. Meaning I don't want to fool myself that the processing I made actually makes it feel better because it's louder when I apply it. I just want the processing. I just want to see the character change so that I can judge better, so I can judge with more certainty that the processing I applied actually works well for what I want to do. So let's try that. Let's bypass and unbypass to see what it sounds like with and without processing. So you can see that a lot of those mids out of the bass actually disappear, and that's due to this OTT, multiband compressor. But you see, now I can just do that and judge if it's actually better or not. So that disappearing, is that something that fits my track or not? It doesn't really have to mean that something disappearing out of this signal is, consequentially bad. It could sound that this is, with that lack of those frequencies, going to fit much easier with all the other elements that I have in the track. And that might just be the case, since right here I have another copy of that bass line with some of the frequencies exaggerated right here. So maybe those are the frequencies that are going to be missing once I applied processing right there. Now that's some of the mixing decisions that I have to make, but it's going to be easier for me to make those mixing decisions if I actually have all of the processing done in such a way that when I bypass any of the effects on any of the channels, I just hear the processing and I just hear that character being applied. So is it dynamics, is it EQ, or spectral balance change with the filters, whatever. I just want that change to be shown to me without any gain reduction or gain amplification. Meaning that, let's say I dislike this OTT, I can just disable it and my mix still stays well, so I don't have to go back and fiddle with my mixing decisions again. So when I do that, I'm making sure that whatever down the road I don't like, I can just disable it and that's it. I don't have to think about remixing the track again and again and again. Now, aside of having that liberty to just disable anything in the project I deem not fit, also helps me make a better decision when mixing. I'm actually applying processing and deciding if the processing is right for a certain track or not. In mixing, it is very important to make the right decisions. Now, there is no wrong decisions. A mix can be done in 1,000 ways, and all of those 1,000 ways could be good. The point is, it's going to make it easier for you to judge and move on and mix better and faster with more quality. So always consider what you're doing to the levels. Aside of that, there is a lot of effects being modeled after, analog gear, hardware gear. And those effects usually expect a certain level of signal that resembles the level of signal that was expected by the actual hardware devices. Now, knowing that, if you're going to use any of those effects, you don't want your levels to be too hot. And you don't have to. So usually when we think about our levels and why we want them to be, loud in this digital resolution of minus infinite to zero, that decibel scale, full scale, why we want that is to actually use the most of that resolution that we can. Now, if we're thinking that everything inside of this project is 24-bit information, so all the files are 24-bit, and if we think how much of that resolution is going to be left there once I export this track into a 16-bit, stereo WAV file, it's not going to be that much left of it. If you think about it, that 16-bit resolution is just a fraction of this 24-bit resolution I have right here. So even if all these levels were really, really quiet down to a certain point, they would still have more resolution and more quality than the 16-bit that I'm going to get in the end after I stop working with it. So that 24-bit resolution also helps us to have that. One other thing that I could also advise is, if we have anything audio, let's say like file like this, and we have that audio file right there on the track itself, I would advise pulling down on the volume of the actual audio, just like this. And instead of pulling, let's say, minus 14 decibel, just like right here, what I did right there. Now, for me, it doesn't really matter where it is, where the value is. But if you think about somebody who's going to be using any kind of, tangible device to mix their tracks, so any kind of controller with faders on them that are going to resemble a mixer, and those faders are going to be controlling these controls right here, just transferring that information you're giving to the controller onto these faders right there on the tracks. If you look at it, right here you have much more resolution of movement in the top part. So this is 6 dB, 6 dB, 6 dB, and now that 6 dB difference starts shrinking, meaning that right down here, the resolution of the movement is much smaller. So meaning you have to move much less just to get a big difference. And it makes mixing with a tangible device, a bit harder to do. Of course, if all of these values were all the way down here, any small movement would actually induce a large movement in level. So having your levels right here around zero, around unity, is very good because it's easier to mix that way. The resolution of the movement is much greater if you're using any kind of controller. So meaning that instead of having a WAV file this loud and moving down 7 dBs, I could actually move the volume on that audio, let's say 7 dBs down, just like this, and then move this back to zero. That means that now if I'm using any tangible device where I'm moving a fader, a hardware fader that is moving right here, this fader here, the volume level, I would have a much easier job on controlling that fader with my hand. So consider that too.